the evolutionary piece is that a certain amount of aggression is a survival mechanism. Think about cavemen competing for the best cave. Sometimes I think aggression reminds me of an appendix. It's like an artifact of another time that we've not thrown away. Some of the aggressive things are in our genes, but it's how we express those that's changed so much.
Welcome to another episode of Mental Health in the Age of the Metaverse. I'm your host, Christian Ulstrup, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Sheri Bauman. Sheri is a Professor Emerita of Counseling at the University of Arizona. Prior to earning her PhD and becoming a licensed psychologist, she worked in public schools for 3 decades. Sheri researches bullying and cyberbullying. She has written 6 books, and her work has been published in over 65 peer-reviewed journals. Sheri, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So to start, you've got a very particular set of expertise, which I think is uncommon even amongst mental health professionals in this digital age that we find ourselves in 2022, across the topics of not just bullying, but cyberbullying. How did you originally become interested in these topics?
Well, as you said, I've worked with young people for most of my life, truthfully. And as a teacher and a school counselor, I know I dealt with both sides of the bullying, perpetrators and targets, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't have any training in how to intervene. And I began to realize that this was a pretty common issue. And so that was part one. When I was working as a school psychologist, one of the my colleagues had developed a program called Kung Fu, where he was teaching kids who were likely targets some clever responses and so forth. And then I began to think, this, A, it is important. B, there are strategies that we can try. And I don't know if you're aware, but there was no research really on cyberbullying until the 80s. And that came about when there was a suicide of 3 young boys, actually, in Norway. And Norway invested a ton of money in, we've got to do something about this. This is not acceptable. And that opened up a research line, which I found fascinating and got absorbed in that.
Very interesting. And cyberbullying, when did that start to emerge as something that was happening and then a field of study?
I think, when did Facebook become public? 2006 or something?
I think it was about 2003, maybe 4. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it was first for just the college students, and then it went, public. And there were chat rooms and other features before then. But I think when social media really took off, and there were continual improvements, or some people wouldn't call them improvements, in the software and the options, it became obvious that bullying had just moved itself, not entirely, but that it just provided another tool for perpetrators to harm their targets, and a very convenient one at that.
Right. There's no friction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You have access to anybody at any time. And so I guess, what is the definition then of cyberbullying? Okay.
Are you ready for this? Because it's quite, well, it may not seem controversial to you, but it is in the field. But the easy definition is that it's bullying using digital tools to perpetrate. But the official definition includes deliberate action. So we know that some things can be intended to be funny that turn out not to be so funny. So would that qualify? We don't know. The official definition calls for repeated action as opposed to a one-time event. Well, if I only attack you once, but 1 million people forwarded it or, copy it, is that repeated? There are all those questions. And then the big one is the power differential. a classic feature of bullying is that the person who's perpetrating has more power. We have the cartoon image of the big Hulk, attacking the little puny kid. It's not that. That can be, but that's actually less common. So you have a kid with a lot of social clout. You have a kid who has the newest phone. You have the kid who has the best sneakers, whatever, most popular athlete. Those kids have more power, social capital. But on the other hand, the kid who's really savvy about technology and can do things very cleverly to bully, well, is that a power differential or not? And so the short answer is, I don't know.
Interesting. And it's got to be evolving at a rapid pace.
Right. Yeah. And it's almost the quantity of publications. I'm on several lists that notify me when new research is published on cyberbullying. And I could do nothing else but read those and never catch up. And I'm a fast reader. So, synthesizing all this and trying to understand mainly, what works, how we can protect kids, how we can help them protect themselves, what are the dynamics. There's a whole line of research in moral disengagement, which is a separate topic. How do you convince yourself to do something it's wrong? Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things. So it's just an enormous field, and there are researchers all over the world. So I'm sometimes shocked at there doesn't seem to be much. It goes on in Africa and undeveloped countries, in South America, everywhere anybody has studied it. Bullying and cyberbullying is an issue of concern.
That's incredible. And is this something that is just inherent, unfortunately, to the human condition? Or is it, in some cases, I think about with digital media, I got to imagine there are behaviors that must be a product of the medium itself. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, the evolutionary piece is that a certain amount of aggression is a survival mechanism. Think about cavemen and the other group clan competing for the best cave or whatever, that you need a certain amount of aggression to manage those. Sometimes I think aggression reminds me of an appendix. We have it. Well, I don't. And I've done just fine. And, it's like an artifact of another time that we've not thrown away. And I think some of the aggressive things are in our genes, but it's how we express those that's changed so much. And I forgot the rest of the question.
I think that makes a ton of sense. It's a perfect segue to kind of the second part, which is you now have a new sort of set of digital spaces. You have, some nominally new behaviors, or at least habits that the people have developed because of the devices that they're using and the places where they're meeting people, and the kind of relationships that you build online and the way that you relate. And so, that vestigial trait, the appendix of aggression being applied through these new media must just create very weird new dynamics. And obviously there's been a lot of talk about this, but you've really been at the forefront for a long time seeing it play out.
I just thought of something, also because we're such social creatures. Let's go back. It's important that there be a hierarchy in social groups. Back to the caveman, a woolly mammoth is approaching, and to sit down and have a long discussion and reach consensus about what to do could end up meaning the death of that group. So in most groups of any kind, there's, some people with more authority and some with less. Some of those with less aspire to higher status. Others are content to stay at the bottom, and those at the top really want to keep that power. So that's another factor of being human. And then you layer on with adolescence, the need for acceptance and social status in the peer group. It's sort of like you have a cocktail ready to explode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, especially as everyone is increasingly in front of their phones for however many hours a day.
And not just kids.
Yeah. Adults. So you see cyberbullying with adults as well.
It's a serious problem in the workplace. We see it every day in the political arena. Dating apps, it's sort of amusing to me because I'm obviously not the typical dating age, but I have friends who are single or widowed or whatever who go on these dating apps, and the stories, some of them are hilarious, but others are a little frightening when you realize these people can manipulate you and get information about you because you begin to develop this relationship or romance, so you think. So in all aspects of our life nowadays, and in schools, I've been observing schools, every kid has a laptop. And that's partly because of the pandemic. But they all do that. They can all type, but they can't all write.
That's incredible. And so there are many different settings, many different media. What are some specific examples of cyberbullying? And part of the reason why I ask is I know we have parents who are listening and they're probably concerned about, this could be something that their kids might have to deal with. Maybe they are, or they might have to in the future. What are those different types of cyberbullying? Are there any kind of, particular behaviors that a parent, should be on the lookout for that would give them an indication?
So let me answer them in two pieces. Probably the most familiar type is just what I think we would call dissing in, interpersonal interactions, insulting, rude, embarrassing, humiliating with embarrassing comments, even threatening, spreading rumors, which is a way to harm someone's social relationships and friendships. Excluding is particularly important to young people. Perhaps what they considered so close social group has a party or an event. She's not invited, and then she sees all the postings of everybody else's photos. There's those kinds of things. To me, there are two that are really serious. One of those is outing, and that can be done by a friend who suddenly is not your friend. You've had a conflict, and they know secrets about you, and they tell them, and then the whole world knows. We saw that just recently in the news. There was a boy. They used someone lured him into sending a sexual photo to someone he had formed an online relationship, and of course, they were going to blackmail him and about posting it online, and he committed suicide. I mean, that's pretty horrendous outcome. So outing, telling someone's secrets, doxing. I had an example of that with a colleague who's transgender, and gives talks about it. And someone who didn't think that was appropriate gave his address, the names of his kids and what schools they went to, his phone number. He was terrified because some people used that, to harass him, not just online, but in person. Masquerading, someone pretending to be you, doing offensive things. And then, of course, the people who are targeted think you did it. I even had a personal example of that 100 years ago. I was studying for my licensure exam for psychologist, and there was a news group, we called it then. And we would discuss, questions or topics, and it was very helpful. Someone would say, I'm looking at the section on dual diagnosis, and this part isn't clear, and someone would do it. It's really a good group. And anyway, one time someone posted a question, and I noticed she was from Colorado State University, where I had a master's and knew a lot of the people in town. So I said, back channel. I think the original one was, if you're interested, I'd like to talk with you back channel just about the city. And then, I don't know, weeks later, I got a message from her saying, I am reporting you to the psychology license board. I am reporting you to your university. You should never, and went on and on about how And I was just flabbergasted. Someone had taken my identity and emailed all these people with really crude, repulsive, offensive comments. So of course she didn't think I should have a license or, a doctorate. And I was able to trace the owner of that group who was able to get the IP address of the person who claimed that he was on vacation, and it must have been his house guest who did it, but he couldn't be sure. And I said, I want a letter of apology to the state and to my university. But maybe it was a prank, but that could have destroyed my career.
That's incredible. And I mean, especially as all parts of our lives are digitized, the risk of those kind of things increasing it's going up. Yeah.
No, being masquerading, have someone pretend to be you. You don't have to do anything. Someone else can do things in your name. There are people who are really trolls. They get great pleasure in upsetting people and will deliberately provoke shock actions and so forth. And don't feed the trolls is the common thing. And I really, really, really believe that. And stalking, just the way you can hide and follow someone around, you can do that online. You can harass people. You can, you could create a fake social media account with my information and then be me and be not me, but be me in a way that would cause me harm. So that's some of the ways that people use digital media to bully or cyberbully.
Let's talk about trolls for a second. What is the psychology of a troll? Who are these people? What's going on?
We don't know a whole lot, but there's a small body of research that has given all these personality tests to people and the problem is they're self-selecting. So we don't know if they represent the universe of trolls, but they have a high score on sadism. They enjoy. And I don't know whether it's the reaction to, aha, I've got power now. I made you upset. And they don't care if what they say is real or not. They just want that reaction to say, I got you. And to me, there is a piece of sadism in that because what they're doing is deliberately enjoying someone else's pain. And if you're a troll, I mean, that's your MO. That's how you interact. So that's the only defining feature that's been identified. I'm sure there are more, but that's a little disturbing. Yeah,
unfortunately, I think you mentioned this before. This is, this has reached the realm of politics. Right? Oh. It feels like, just the troll in chief, right?
Right. I wrote a book, my last book, Political Cyberbullying, has a chapter with that title.
Really?
Yeah, I talked about, cyberbullying in the political arena, and I could not write it without talking about the par excellence example of a cyber. And, that's an issue for kids. They see this.
Yeah.
Not just there, but elsewhere. They see people doing these things. And then you say, no, that's not nice.
But the example has been set.
Right.
It's a big problem. Yeah. So we've talked a lot about, some of these various types of cyberbullying and the problems one can run into on the wild west of the internet. What have you found to be effective interventions if somebody is dealing with cyberbullying, and certainly an adolescent? What would you say to them and potentially their parents?
In terms of general interventions, again, the research doesn't support a particular program. I do think and I would encourage parents to be aware of this and think about it anyway, are the kind of cross-generational programs. There's one in Japan, for example. College students train high school students in cyberbullying and moderate them as they design an educational program that they deliver to middle school students in workshops and so forth. And then the middle school students do the upper elementary grades. Kids are much more interested in what near peers, kids just a couple years older, have to say. They often dismiss adults. What do you know? You can't imagine what it's like. But kids who are close to them, sometimes, and in Italy, there's a program where they design a project as a class. So those kinds of things are out there. In terms of in the family, there are two things I think are critical. One is modeling. If you're having your phone at the dinner table, and so is everybody else, you're saying this is more important than our relationships or our special time. If you're driving and you're looking at your phone and, that becomes the center of your life, it's very difficult to tell a child that, well, you're too young. They see through that. The other thing I think is helpful is when there is an example in the news, and you probably find one every day, even that situation with the young boy who killed himself after his sexual image, and I can't recall whether it was actually posted or he threatened to post it. We need to talk about that with our kids, and say, look at this story. What do you think? What should he have done? What should the parents have done? Where was the first mistake, which was, of course, befriending someone online that they didn't know in person. But I think making it a topic of discussion, letting kids know, that this exists. They may know more than you. My first introduction to social media was a young client I had, and I didn't know anything about MySpace. And he delighted in showing, this new tool that he had, and he helped me create a profile. So they like to be the authority and respect that they probably are. When you read something and you don't quite understand, Susie, can you give me a hand here? I read this and I don't know what's this TikTok thing, or how do you do it? And how can I protect myself? To engage them in the process rather than simply telling them what to do, because there is no magic answer. But I think the modeling and making it a topic of discussion, both within the family, can we all agree not to have our phones on the dinner table? Mm-hmm. And why does that matter? But also when we learn of it, maybe your child comes home from school and you say, I just read this article about cyberbullying. Is that happening to any of your friends? Opening the topic so the child could say, well, yeah, and it's also happened to me. And then talk about how do you manage that? What do you do when it happens? How do you keep it from hurting you and damaging and so forth? So because there is no magic bullet, I think engaging with young people on this topic, and if they know more, that's great. They love to share their expertise. And then as a group, you decide, maybe we want to go to schools and say we need to incorporate these topics into the curriculum. But on a day-to-day basis, I think those are the two things I would most recommend.
Makes a lot of sense. So really setting a good example yourself, and two, meeting them where they are. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I even saw there was a really interesting, you might have seen this, a study published, I think it was University of Wisconsin recently, about the direct line between parents' unhealthy or healthy tech habits and then their own kids' sort of mental and physical health. Makes sense, just like you're saying, but yeah. Yeah.
And, even physically, to discuss how much time is reasonable to spend on your phone or on your computer. How much is this keeping you from getting physical exercise because you're on your phone? Is this keeping you from normal social interactions? Do you feel uncomfortable when you go to talk to someone in person? There's no like 2 hours is too much. So, it varies with what they're doing and why they're doing it and who they're doing it with. But it has taken over. Do you ever go out to dinner, you see two perfectly normal, middle-aged adults sitting at a table together, and they are on their phones the entire time. They never look up and speak to each other. I find that, really sad, actually.
It's crazy. And yeah, I mean, with the pandemic, that's accelerated everything, right? In terms of screen time, you have folks, a lot of the kids who we work with in our program have become very isolated,
right?
Which is terrible. But then on the other hand, I kind of wanted to pull on a thread from a little bit earlier, which is you can develop relationships with strangers online. And I guess I think a question that's probably top of mind for a lot of people, and especially parents, is it possible for my kid to develop relationships that are healthy and safe with people on the internet? I think you mentioned before validating if this is somebody who you already know offline. That's certainly a strategy. But it seems to have really proliferated. I mean, I myself, my now wife would make fun of me, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I was making, quote, internet friends on Twitter because I was just hungry for some kind of relationship. So when we were all holed up, so what do you think about that? Is it possible to develop healthy relationships with strangers online? If so, how do you discern between those healthy and unhealthy relationships?
So the first answer is yes, but rarely, not rarely, but there's a lot more opportunities to make unhealthy relationships online because you don't know who's really behind that identity. I think one good place to do that is in various groups that have a specific focus. If someone's really interested in geology and there's a geology group for Facebook and you join that and you have an opportunity to not just look at the person's profile, but to see them interacting in the way they do things, I think the odds of that friendship increasing and becoming a real relationship are much better than just some random person whose picture you like or who is the friend of a friend of a friend. I rarely friend people that I don't know, but there are people I know of, like in other countries, and I don't know them, but I'll friend them because they publish, interesting information that I want to be aware of. So I think like most things digital, you have to be very cautious and thoughtful and consider all the options and take it slow so you're not jumping into something that potentially can harm you.
Makes sense. So validating that there's some degree of credibility and that a signal of that could be the common interest group, or if they have some information about, about their profile or something elsewhere, but just, somebody who's totally anonymous, right? That's how you get like the trolls, like, that's their, 4chan, right? Is like, that is the home of the trolls where everything's anonymous. So,
well, and Reddit has its share.
Oh yeah. We could talk about that for a whole podcast, I think.
Right. And with parents, they need to know not just that their kid is on social media, what social media are they on and how do they use it? Are they more sort of lurkers who just observe and comment occasionally? Do they follow mostly famous, celebrities? Do they, all of those factors contribute to the ultimate impact that's going to have on someone. And a lot of it is just normal human responses. When I see everybody's on the beach in Hawaii, I think,
Yeah. And if you're exposed to that, I mean, the problem is on the digital world, you can have an infinite stream of whatever content in a particular direction, whereas in reality, there are physical constraints, right? So that's interesting. This point of anonymity, I wanted to dig into a little bit because one of the reasons why we originally connected was because I read your chapter in the Adolescent group psychotherapy textbook, basically. And you wrote about the use of anonymous remote groups. And so in that case, the anonymity had some kind of interesting features. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
There are some people, but adolescents in particular, who are very self-conscious. It may be particularly about their appearance, or maybe they have a rare disorder or problem that they're unlikely to encounter, age mates or classmates that they share. And that's something they really want to do. If they cannot have to show their physical self or other features, I think I mentioned in that chapter, I had a deaf student who, when we did that terrible experiment with the group, loved it because no one knew she was deaf. And, if you meet her in person, instantly. And for her, it was freeing to be really herself instead of that deaf student that very often people with various problems or disabilities are defined by that. And that's not who they are. They feel as though as soon as you see me, for example, and I have in my case, as a teenager, I had terminal acne. That's what you see. I don't, so the anonymity in that sense gives you a way to interact with people without those barriers of physical or even if you're using chat, you don't have to be quite so articulate verbally. You can kind of compose and check it before you add it to the group. But if we're talking about groups, the technology has evolved obviously a lot since that group. But if they're groups being led by professionals, it's really important to screen the members and know who they are in reality. For one thing, if you have an emergency and have to contact them or have to refer them, but for another, to make sure that they aren't trolls or that they aren't joining the group to disrupt it, but that they're sincerely interested. But I think it's very freeing for some kids to be able to be anonymous or have an avatar. My avatar isn't good. I play with that. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can play a role in changing that a little bit. So it sounds like, in a clinical setting, and that was the work that you focused on in particular, but I think this is true more generally, it's just like in real life. I mean, you need to be able to moderate the group, and you got to have a facilitator, and you got to have somebody who knows what they're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And so, it's probably a good segue to, you've got a new book coming out, which is the second edition of, what's the title?
Mental Health in the Digital Age.
Mental Health in the Digital Age.
I think it came out into 2015, which means we wrote it ahead of that. And it almost feels like it's a dinosaur. There are some general ideas that are still relevant, but the digital landscape, and that's what's a little bit scary. It evolves every day. There's going to be something new or some new, ability that you can do online that you couldn't do yesterday. And particularly, I think the pandemic taught us a lot about mental health online. First of all, people physically couldn't get to a therapist's office. We were locked down or restricted. But then some of the barriers disappeared. You didn't have to take a bus. You didn't have to spend 2 hours getting to a place. You could, when the sites to offer therapy improved in terms of security and privacy, you could feel safe. Some people have continued therapy online, even though now it's not so important to stay away from face-to-face, but it's very comfortable for some people. They're in their own nest. The downside is you also need to have some privacy. So for kids, and that was true in education settings as well, if you're in a therapy group or a counseling group, you need to have a space where someone isn't going to wander in and so forth. It's a distraction, and B, it's an invasion of privacy of the other members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that can just mess with the whole
right.
the whole process, right? Yeah, and so there's that trade-off. It's kind of one of the sort of thought experiments or insights that my co-founders and I would talk about at the beginning was just that as a kid, going into a therapist's office is just such an alien experience, and talk about a power differential, right? And so
exactly.
being able to, to meet them where they are, that can really, it flips the script.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that facilitates that therapeutic alliance, which is weird because we're not in the same room. But for many young people, as you said, some of those, intangible almost messages that you get are not there. And it's a much more collegial, or we're both working on this together, rather than I know all the answers.
You're sort of on the same level.
Yeah.
And if you're an avatar, right?
Yes.
Quite literally. Yeah. Very interesting. And so in this new book, obviously everybody should pre-order and go and buy it. And we'll include links and everything in the show notes. But particularly for mental health professionals, because I think a lot of people are struggling to figure out how to keep up with a lot of the things that counselors, therapists, psychologists are really on the front lines of what's going on with the mental health crisis. And you see something new, it sounds like, all the time. So what advice do you have for those folks? And are there any insights that you can share, from what you've learned working on the second edition?
Well, one thing is to refer to your professional organizations, and they often have listings of or links to articles that talk about new features and how to use them. When therapy began to go online more broadly, people had to find HIPAA compliant platforms to do it. And most people, couldn't do that on their own. And so they would go seek out a profession. I think there are many, many, many more webinars on those kinds of topics than I've ever seen, because it is something that everybody's concerned about. There's even issues of, there's the two sides of it. If you don't have geographic restrictions for members of your group, for example, you can put together a really dynamite group with one person in Georgia and another in Oregon. But then you have licensure issues. Is it legal for you to do that? And I think it's just too much for an individual therapist, but a state or local professional organization. Our state psychological association invited me to give a 4-hour webinar and hand out with links. So I would encourage them to find one or two sites that are, professionally curated and are current, and get as much information from those as you can. And a lot of those may have a chat feature. I'm not, what do you call it when it's not synchronous, but an opportunity to raise a question. So I'm not sure, or I just learned about XYZ. For example, an interesting thing happened. I was in a group, and I don't want to go through the whole thing, but it turned out a member of the group was using the chat feature to harass another member, but none of us knew what was going on. Suddenly one member had, who was very verbal, was interacting, and suddenly they're like deadpan, quiet, almost physically withdrawing. So one of the things to decide, do you want to have the chat open? That can be useful if someone's having a tech problem, for example. But if it lends itself to people forming alliances or deciding to essentially harass someone else without the rest of the group knowing. So those are the kinds of topics I think that come up on some of these webinars and websites, and Zoom fatigue and what that has to do with your eyes. So be cautious, because you can't read everything. You just can't, and you can't go to every webinar. So just, determine for you which ones seem to have the most current, most accurate information and the most features, like can you ask a question, or is there contact an expert feature, or, those kinds of options.
Excellent. It's a lot that needs to get figured out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as soon as we figure it out, there's going to be something new.
Exactly. Yeah. So I asked you a little bit earlier about things that parents should know about cyberbullying, but more generally, this is a topic that is top of mind. There's a new New York Times series that's all about mental health and the role of technology and social media in particular. If there's one thing that parents listening to this podcast can take away, whether it's, something they should understand or a practical insight about the role of technology and screen-based digital media in their child's mental health going forward, what would you have them? What would you have them know?
I think to pick out one thing, I would have them know that their kids, whether they know it or not, live their lives online in many ways, and to join that, to inquire, and just the way you would say, how did school go today? Did you see that thing on, Twitter? Wasn't that, upsetting? To make sure that it's something that is talked about, and that you observe changes in your kid's behavior. For example, the kid that was super active suddenly doesn't want to go near the phone, just leaves it. Or two of the mental health conditions that are most common are depression and anxiety. And if they see the symptoms of those disorders, don't discount them as normal teenage angst. They can be, but it's more likely they may be experiencing something that's embarrassing, or, imagine a teenage girl who does get involved in sexting that's misappropriated, and then you have to tell your mom. Well, yeah, you should be able to let them know that you're open to discussing, that there's a lot of concern, and I want to be with you in this.
Excellent. I think that's a great point to close up on. Great piece of practical advice for parents. Sheri, where can people find you?
Well, they can find me on all the social media that I'm on, just about every one, although I don't check them. The University of Arizona has a page. Maybe you can give that information out to the listeners. Mm-hmm. That has my bio and CV. And my email, which is actually the best way to reach me. I check email very frequently and respond. And even if we're going to communicate later in a different medium, that's the best way to do so.
Excellent. And so your handle across all the social media, including TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all the above, and whatever else comes next, is at Sheri Bauman. So that's SHERIBAUMAN. Yep. And you've got a new edition of your book,
in the spring.
Yes, coming out in the spring. Mental Health in the Digital Age. Very excited to crack that open. And then I'm sure you'll be working on a third, maybe a fourth edition not too soon after that.
Some other irons in the fire. I might mention my book. You talked about trolls, on political cyberbullying. Mm-hmm. It's hopefully not being directly experienced, but I think it tells us a lot about our society. And I enjoyed writing that.
It does. I mean, what's going to happen when, this generation starts participating politically? It's grown up with this stuff. Remains to be seen. Mm-hmm. So we all have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Well, Sheri, thank you so much for joining me. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me. This was very fun to exchange ideas.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insight. And I hope we can do it again soon.
Thanks. I hope so too.